Hey everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. This is I think it'll be the penultimate preservation episode. So this time around I'm going to talk about what's easily the most difficult, and that is jellies and jams and preserves. And I don't mean difficult as in like don't ever do this because oh my goodness, it's very fun to do, it's very nice. What I mean is it's just more labor intensive than the other methods I'm described. Slightly on par with canning, except the big difference is you really got to watch that stovetop because you don't want to scorch the jams or jellies, and you don't want it to bubble over. That's always bad, and and really you just have to check the consistency pretty regularly. So here's the deal with jams and jellies. This is the big disadvantage that they have. You need sugar. It's very difficult, almost impossible to make a jam or jelly without adding sugar. And usually you add quite a bit of sugar. Because really what jam and jelly is, the reason why it works and why it lasts, the reason why they're called preserves, is what you're really doing is you're taking fruit, which is normally very high in water content, and you're making like a cage around all that water using sugar crystals and pectin. Basically, the pectin is like rebar, and the sugar crystals are like little iron cages, and you trap that water in those cages in that matrix that's created as a direct result of sugar and pectin. And for that reason, because it's harder to get at the moisture and there's a lower moisture content, bacteria are going to have a lot of trouble. Even though bacteria love sugar, it's going to be very difficult for them to actually colonize it because of the inability to access the adequate amount of moisture, because bacteria need high moisture contents to survive in most circumstances. So that's the deal. That's the theory behind it. And some things you can just, because they have high pectin content, it's much easier. Apples, for example, very easy to make jellies and jams out of. And by the way, this is my personal opinion, but I do prefer, this is just a hippy dippy viewpoint. Um, I do prefer natural pectin in the sense that I'd rather just put some apple peels in whatever else I'm making to get it to gel rather than using just the pectin you buy at the store, which is a powder. It's not really a big deal. It's still natural, it's still pectin. There's no reason not to use it if you want to use it. There's no disadvantages. I'm just weird about it, and I'd rather use apple peels. That's yeah. By the way, you're looking for a good source of pectin. Apple peels. They are phenomenal at it. It's the reason why people often will add it to different jams and jellies that have a lower pectin content naturally in order to get it to gel. So really what you're doing is you're taking fruit, you are crushing the fruit in a pot, or some cases I have often done this, really you're just putting it in a pot, adding enough water and boiling the heck out of it until it starts breaking down, at which point you add a lot of sugar. And you're just going to keep adding sugar until it gets to a point, again, also adding pectin containing compounds at the outset of doing so, until you can take a little bit of it on a spoon and drop it in cold water and it will gel instantly. Once it hits that point, then you can let it cool down and put it into jars, and and you can even seal the jars the way you did in the canning process that I mentioned before. But really, it's not even necessary, generally speaking, because of the very high sugar to water ratio. It's going to last a long time. Think about bar syrup, for example. If you're making bar syrup, super easy to do. You literally just take like 2-to-1 ratio of sugar to water so that it has a very high sugar content to the point that it's a semi-solid. It's a syrup. Again, that's what a syrup is. It's difficult for a lot of things to colonize that, and so it has a pretty decent shelf life on its own. This is why sugar is actually used as a preservative in things for that very purpose, because it decreases the ratio of moisture and it makes it a little harder for a single-celled organism to live on it. Well, you can do the exact same process, except you keep adding sugar, and again, the pectin makes that cage. So really, in a sense, jellies, jams, preserves, they're just sugar, they're just juice that's been matrixed by sugar and pectin. That's really what makes it work. It's very similar to making a syrup. You just keep going until you have a semi-solid. That and the fact that pectin tremendously changes the consistency and makes it a solid much faster. But the downsides, the big downsides though, is again, it is a more labor intensive process, and you do have to keep adding sugar, and you can also add spices and other things as you please. And then of course the big downside is because you're adding sugars, pepper jelly being a peculiar exception to this rule. Generally speaking, you can only do this with fruits, with sweet things. There's not really a lot of savory jellies out there, excluding, of course, like I said, pepper jelly. And then just the fact that you got to add sugar to it, it does make it a little harder from like a prepper, homesteader. Everything I eat, I'm going to come up with myself. Well, sugar is not really one of those things that you can adequately refine on your own unless you go full blown, like Dr. Stone, we're making our own batteries and eyeglasses kind of intensity. That being said, I really like making jellies, especially out of just excess fruit that I happen to grow that year. Grapes being the number one, because grapes are one of those funny things where I'll have a year where I won't have a lot and I'll still make jelly usually. And then other years I'll just have such an abundance that it's like trying to find things to do with all those grapes, and jelly is a great example of that because grapes have an extremely short shelf life. Grape jelly, on the other hand, you can keep for 18 months or so on average. I mean, and if you can, it even longer. And in the next episode, if you freeze it, even longer. So that's just some food for thought when it comes to making jams and jellies. Is you do need to follow a recipe. It's kind of like making bread. Highly recommend you look into actual recipes that you can find, which are very, very abundant and online. Thankfully, I was taught how to make jelly as a kid. I didn't have to use the internet. I had written recipes down and things like that. But I still recommend looking at external sources for things like that because you might learn something new about it. Oh, one other little thing is quinces. Quinces, man, they are full of pectin. If you have access to quinces, that can be even better for making jellies, just because, again, it's got a very high pectin content, and you can add it to just about anything that won't overpower it because quinces have a very delicate pear-like flavor. So feel free to do that. The only jelly I've never made, let's see, I've made strawberry, grape, apple, etc. I haven't really made a marmalade. Maybe this year I'll do that. And again, the key reason for that is I do live in a temperate area, and I like to make jellies out of things that I grow myself, and I've never grown lemons or oranges, unfortunately. But again, this is all just suggested, but the reason I wanted to talk about it is, one, jellies, jams, preserves are a great way to hold on to otherwise very, very perishable fruits. But at the same time, it is a little more of a specialty thing, and I do recommend, personally, this is subjective, but I recommend fermentation as your first foray into preservation, followed by cellaring, followed by jellies, followed by canning, and, well, actually the next episode would be even better after fermentation or even before. It's a much easier thing. Stay tuned for that one. There's going to be 2 more. So like, share, subscribe, keep asking questions. Bye.